Welcome to this week's edition of Film Shocks with Hitchcock, my year-long journey with the master of suspense. And today we have the 1931 film directed by the man himself, titled The Skin Game, which was based on a play by John Galsworth that was released in 1920. Galsworth and his play The Skin Game are pretty notable. As recently as 2005, there was a production off-Broadway, so it's still somewhat well known to the public. But this film from 1931, not so much. Like a lot of early Hitchcock movies, this has gone forgotten and didn't get a Blu-ray release until 2019 through the Alfred Hitchcock Kinoset. I watched the film and I did some research, and granted, there isn't a whole lot to really say about this one. Even when I went through the interviews presented in the Truffaut book, there wasn't a lot that Hitchcock had to say about it. Truffaut brought it up, and Hitchcock basically said he made the film, he didn't make it by choice, he doesn't have a lot to say. Truffaut also asks a question about budgets at the time for these films, specifically with The Skin Game. I don't really know what the association is, but after that, Hitchcock goes on a different tangent about having to use 4 cameras because there wasn't dubbing at the time. And then he says when he was doing television and they had to use multiple cameras, he made the comment that, I can do multiple cameras, it's not a problem, I've been doing this since 1928. So a lot of that doesn't really line up because clearly this movie is a sound film. This was not made in 1928. And as for the 4-camera deal, I don't really know what he's talking about. I don't even think the film Mary is brought up in the Truffaut book. Mary was the German version of Murder that was filmed simultaneously. So if he was mentioning 4 cameras, I would assume what he really meant was he was doing different language versions of the same film. And Mary would be an example of that, but I don't really know why, after The Skin Game is brought up, why he mentioned something about 4 cameras. Even when I try to look anything up about this comment, there doesn't seem to be any discussion about it online, so I might need to hop on to one of those Hitchcock forums and maybe ask the question to see if anyone really knows what he's talking about. Maybe he was being hyperbolic, maybe he just meant the 2 cameras, especially what would be done in the silent era. I know they did that with Phantom of the Opera, but I don't know if he shot any of his movies with 2 or more cameras anyway. I have not heard any of this until now, and if he did, I would assume a lot of that footage is lost and not even known about. But anyway, let's get back to The Skin Game, which, again, not a whole lot to say about this one. There was a film made in 1921, directed by B.E. Pratt. I can't find any information about this film either. I believe it's lost. But the actors who played Mr. Hornblower and Mrs. Hillcrest, Edmund Gwenn and Helen Hay, both returned to play the same role in the Hitchcock film 10 years later. I should also point out that if anyone recognizes the name Edmund Gwenn, yes, he was the Santa Claus in the original Miracle on 34th Street. Skin Game, which I guess is associated with the terminology used for immoral business operations, begins with shots of axes cutting down trees in the forest, and we learn that the Hillcrests lived nearby the land operations being run by Hornblower. However, years earlier, they had sold some of their land to the Hornblowers, including the property that the Jackmans' house was living upon. The Jackmans are an older couple, and there was a deal made that the Hornblowers, regardless of anything, would not evict the Jackmans. However, years later, Hornblower is trying to buy the property for a small amount and plans to evict the Jackmans. So in order to protect them, the Hillcrests plan to buy the land themselves. The Hillcrests attempt to buy the land themselves. This leads to an excellent auction scene that goes on for almost 10 minutes with no sound, but it's excellently edited and executed. I enjoy this scene a whole lot. However, there is a third associate in the building who also bids on the land. Hillcrest feels comfortable that this isn't Hornblower who's buying the land, so he lets it go through. He only finds out after the fact that this agent actually works for Hornblower, so Hornblower actually got the land in the end. In the meantime, Hillcrest's agent, Docker, finds out that the wife of one of Hornblower's sons has a dark past. Without giving away too many details, the film is alluding to the idea that Chloe, who is the wife of Charles Hornblower, the son, used to be a prostitute. Using this information, Hillcrest plans to blackmail Hornblower into preserving the land and leaving the Jackmans be to not evict them, in hopes that this information never reaches his son Charles. However, through a convoluted series of events, Charles basically finds out that Chloe used to be a prostitute. He wants to immediately divorce his wife. Chloe is in a depressive rage and eventually kills herself. And that's how the movie ends. So even in terms of plot, there isn't a whole lot to be said here. One family doing something that they consider to be a skin game, something that is immoral, reprehensible in a business matter, but being done for the sake of business. It's not personal. And the Hillcrests decide to strike back with seemingly good intentions, but eventually become aggressive in their own right, and along the way they throw a woman under the bus who, as her life is falling apart, decides to kill herself. So no one is morally right this time. It's a series of events where everybody comes out in the wrong. The Jackmans show up at the end of the film to thank the Hillcrests for saving their home. And when they walk away, the Hillcrests say to themselves, I had completely forgotten about them, the very reason they got involved in this fight to begin with. So psychologically, it's interesting. It's the classic themes we've seen before about business and how it can corrupt one's soul. But unfortunately, I think the film slows down after the auction scene. I gotta say, if you're not interested in this movie, at least watch the auction scene. It is the fast-paced editing that we've come to expect from Hitchcock, and it's a wonderful scene. It goes on for probably way too long, but honestly, I think that makes it better. It really rides the suspense for as long as it possibly can. And since these movies at the time, even though they were sound films, hardly had any music, it's great to watch this scene with no music because it makes the situation all the more dire. There isn't really anything else to fall back upon. It's funny because this wouldn't be the first time Hitchcock would do an auction scene. Did you see North by Northwest? You can actually watch that film and watch this one and see where he took a lot of influence for the very film he'd make 20 years later. Because Chloe was a former prostitute and I guess in a way is meant to have an unclean soul. The only reason that the father even tries to protect her, given this whole situation with the land, is because she's pregnant with a child. Even when she dies, the only comment that he makes is not about Chloe dying, but says, "You've killed my grandchild." So it's a bit frustrating in that aspect. Granted, they do give a lot of screen time to Chloe herself to explain her past ways. Even though the Hillcrests are using this situation as a way to get the land back, they also have their own comments made about Chloe that she overhears. At one point, the daughter, Jill Hillcrest, makes the comment that, what if she kills herself? Do you think they would care? Something like that. So there's not a whole lot of empathy going on here, and I think it was very aware, even for 1931, that there should be some empathy for this woman. But again, I can't help but feel that this was mostly a plot device to add to the other characters' overall personas, to show that no one can be morally clean in this world. Chloe is played by Phyllis Konstam, who we remember from Blackmail, Murder, and Champagne. This would actually be the last Hitchcock film she would star in. We also have Edmund Chapman as Docker, who is the agent of Hillcrest, and he also starred in Murder and Juno and the Paycock. John Longden, who plays Charles Hornblower, Chloe's husband, also starred in Blackmail and Juno and the Paycock. So a lot of returning faces for this one, but kind of a forgotten Hitchcock movie. I don't see much of anything said about this one. Even when I go to Brenton Films, which does such a good job at cataloging the entire Hitchcock filmography, there's not a whole lot written about this one. I guess the transfer on the Kino Blu-ray is the best way to watch the film currently, and there wasn't too many comments about how the transfer holds up or if it's got any flaws to it. But after the initial setup and the great auction scene, I don't think this movie picks up again. It slows down, and even though it's 82 minutes, I just don't think it ever tops the earlier scenes. I'd give it 2.5 out of 5 stars. I didn't hate the movie. I just don't even have much to say. I mean, even Hitchcock's filming style in this one isn't too interesting. But he didn't even seem too interested in the film itself. If you read that interview that he did with Truffaut, he literally has just about as much to say about this one as he did with L Street Calling. And I didn't think that would happen again. I figured there were good reasons why he had nothing to say about L Street Calling. So why this one is in the same category? It shocks me. It's not a bad story, but it's something that British International Pictures probably pushed upon Hitchcock and he felt he had to make, or was contractually obligated to make. There wasn't a whole lot of passion with this one. Well, to wrap things up with this episode, I just want to say thanks for listening. It was a bit of a quick one. Let me know your comments on the Skin Game if you gave it a watch, and let me know what your thoughts are on Hitchcock in general. And next week, we will be taking a look at Rich and Strange. There is a recent Kino Blu-ray release of this film. Very recent. I think it was only released in the past 2 months. And from reading the forums, apparently there are a lot of issues with the transfer. But we'll get to that in next week's episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
This concludes my part of the program. Next time, I shall return with another story.